shout out to A Woman's Place, one of the most principled feminist organisations anywhere. So, and my next point is about the female penis. Last year, I was in Australia doing a book tour, so feminists were at the book tour, and those Australian feminists say it as it is. And we were complaining about the liberal press, and in one particular feature, in one particular liberal broadsheet newspaper, they were discussing, reporting on the case of Karen White, the sex offender, child abuser who ended up, a natal male, suggested to the prison service that he was in fact a trans woman, and ended up sexually assaulting other women in prison, of course the most vulnerable and already sexually assaulted on the planet. Now, one line stood out for me, which was, her erect penis was visible above her tights. And this Australian full-on lesbian turned to me and said, the only time that her penis should be used in a sentence is when a woman has castrated her rapist and she's holding it up. Indeed. So I want to start a brief whistle-stop tour of my experience of the trans Taliban from 2003, when I wrote my first article, which was also the year before the Gender Recognition Act came into force, which is now causing all the havoc because of the proposed changes, which clearly will not go through. So in 2003, I saw just a really short report in a tabloid newspaper about a teacher, a primary school teacher, who had left her school for the summer holidays as Miss, and she had returned after the summer holidays as Mr. The tabloid press said that she had had a sex change and that the children were being encouraged to be open and not in any way freaked out by it. And I realised that I'd never read anything in the British press, or anywhere else for that matter, looking at the absolute madness of the diagnosis of transsexuality. Just the sheer idiocy of it. So I suggested to the Telegraph Sunday magazine that I do this. And of course, we all know that this was a diagnosis that was promoted in particular by misogynistic male psychiatrists in the 1950s, many of whom has been mentioned before, were simply anti-gay, anti-lesbian, and totally reliant on sex stereotypes. The rest of it you know. In the piece, I quoted a forensic psychiatrist who I knew as a feminist, and I knew that she had experience of the effects on women and girls of sexual violence, so I figured she'd be a really good person to give me a quote. Her name is Fiona Mason. She said, and this is 2003, I can't imagine assessing anyone suffering from a serious disorder in under 3 hours. It can take 3 years to assess patients with complex problems. The trouble with some private clinics is that the patients are just given hormones after an hour-long appointment, which can have an irreversible effect on the body. Imagine many psychiatrists daring to say that today. I also quoted the best-known psychiatrist in the country for diagnosing people as transsexual, Russell Reid, who some years later would end up being forced to stop practicing by the GMC after it was discovered that he took approximately 45 minutes to diagnose someone as transsexual before referring them for surgery and hormones. Many of his former patients regretted going through sex change surgery, including my friend Claudia, a great ally who was one of his victims back in the 1980s. And I have to say here, we cannot possibly ignore the fact that many natal males who live as the opposite sex because of this hormone and sex change fuckery are all out to get us and our misogynists. They are victims They are victims of this hideous medical ill practice based on women's oppression. And some do suffer through this. And I hate hearing language being used to demean people who have been through this, who are, to some degree, the victims of patriarchy and are not out to get us. Claudia does not have and has never had a blue fringe. I also wrote in this 2003 piece about Russell Reed. In 2000, Reed was involved in controversy over the condition known as body dysmorphic disorder, BDD, where sufferers can experience a desperate urge to rid themselves of a limb. Reed was one of the psychiatrists who referred two patients with BDD to a surgeon for leg amputations. He said, "When I first heard of people wanting amputations, it seemed bizarre in the extreme. But then I thought, I see transsexuals, and they just want healthy parts of their body removed in order to adjust to their idealised body image. And so I think that was the connection for me. I saw that people wanted to have their limbs off with equally as much degree as obsession and need." So this has implications beyond what we are talking about today. In that piece, I also mentioned children. I wrote, "Particularly disturbing is the apparent impunity with which children are diagnosed with gender identity disorder. Mermaids." A support group for children and teenagers with GID has seen a dramatic increase in inquiries since it opened its doors in 1993. Children as young as 14 are receiving sex change treatment, including being prescribed drugs to block the onset of puberty. Transsexualism is the only psychiatric or medical condition where the patients can, to all intents and purposes, diagnose themselves. No one now would dare say this is a mental illness. I doubt you would get that past any editor. The next year, I left my job in research, decided to do journalism full-time, was asked to write a couple of columns for the Guardian Weekend magazine. Julie Birchall was away, I should have smelled trouble. I'd heard about the hellish legal case that Vancouver Rape Relief had been going through for 10 years by that stage. It had recently been concluded in their favour. A transsexual male called Kimberly Nixon had taken out a case against this absolutely superb organisation. Am I right, Megan? Absolutely, one of the best in the world. He had argued that he should be able to join the collective, counsel rape survivors, etc., because he had decided that he was a woman. It was on a human rights ticket. It was clearly a setup, because the day after it was politely explained to him why he couldn't take the role, the human rights organisation, I forget its name, but it's the usual fuckwittery, issued proceedings against Vancouver Rape Relief. It cost them almost the entire organisation, and had they not had pro bono feminist lawyers working on their behalf, they would have folded, and that it would have been imaginable. So when I wrote this column for Guardian Weekend, I was very angry. And I went absolutely berserk about male entitlement, about the lunacy of the transsexual diagnosis, the trapped in the wrong body thing. There was one line that was particularly picked up on, which was when I was talking about sex stereotypes, that of course transsexuality relies on. I said, imagine a world full of transsexuals. It would look like the set of Grease. And it was before Facebook and Twitter, but there were forums and there were blogs, and there was a particular lesbian online social thing called Ginger Beer, which was supposedly for lesbians, but where lots of trans women were very active, looking to have sex with lesbians. And it went berserk, despite the fact that we were Twitterless and Facebookless. It went everywhere. The Guardian readers editor at the time wrote his column, having received 200 letters of complaint. Clearly it was a lobby, but there was some also that just thought that I had been a really naughty girl for doing this. My editor, Catherine Viner, supported commissioning and publishing the piece and defended my position. The gay press began to vilify me, and I received hate mail and death threats on a weekly basis from the trans-Taliban. But it was also the misogynistic gay male movement that ran the gay press that were particularly active. And this built up to 2008, when I read in Pink News or Penis News, probably more appropriate, that I had been nominated by readers, by the public, for Stonewall's Journalist of the Year. And because Penis News had reported it, as shock, horror, vile, transphobe, Julie Bindel is up for one of our community awards, I decided to go along. I'm not the sort to go to a Stonewall event, trust me. And in fact, ironically, I had a connection at the time with Brian Paddock, who is a Lib Dem peer, but who was a brave whistleblowing police officer. And he offered to escort me from the tube to the Victoria and Albert Museum, where the event was being held, because there was a 200-strong, screaming, baying mob outside, calling for my blood, death, rape, whatever. I'd already found out from a judge that was disgusted with what was happening, that although I was supposed to win, you should see the competition, I'm serious, I hadn't won because they were terrified of the venue being stormed. And this was before the T was added to the LGB. It was still when Ben Summerskill was running the show. So they didn't give me an award, but they gave it to a heterosexual agony aunt who wasn't a journalist. So that seemed like a fair kind of alternative to me. But that demonstration galvanised the transgender movement in the UK. Everywhere from then on, when I went to speak about violence against women and girls, not about transgender issues, although I did try and succeeded occasionally to debate with people from the transgender community who were reasonable and wanted to discuss things. But everywhere I went to talk about male violence towards women and girls, there would be protests, pickets, attempt to disinvite. In 2009, I was bestowed the honour by the National Union of Students to officially be platformed as an individual alongside 5 fascist groups. The motion at the conference that decided my ban contained the sentence, Julie Bindel, misspelt, is vile. Who says that we're not paying for a decent education for these people? In 2010, I accepted an invitation to speak at the Vauxhall Tavern, a well-known queer venue, at an event called Queer Question Time. Never in a million years would I ever have gone to something like this, but I was accepting any invitation to see what would happen and to see who would stand forth and not disinvite me. There I was, baying mob outside again, Bindel's a bigot, Nazi, fascist, Hitler, it's always Hitler, it's never Pol Pot. None of the mid-range dictators ever get a look in. In the venue, it was the first time I was actually physically attacked. A trans person threw an object at me on the stage, and I decided just to get up and walk out. Queues of gay men, not women, gay men, stood back to tell me that they thought I was brave, that I was right, that they agreed with me. The lesbians were all shouting, 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 we're queers, Bindel's a bigot, we support our trans sisters, etc. The videos, if you're interested in this debacle outside Queer Question Time, can be found on YouTube. It happened outside of the UK also, such as when I was doing a talk on the horrors of the sex trade in Denmark with the heroic Janice Raymond, author of the 1979 book, Transsexual Empire. The pro-prostitution lobby, which we have to understand is indivisible from the trans Taliban, were shouting outside that we were causing actual literal violence by being in the city. Have you noticed? If you removed actual and literal from their rants and raves, they would have no speech or words left. We had to be escorted out of the building by police. 2014, I was invited to Essex University by an academic, so the NUS couldn't get involved. And I was debating pornography. A charmer called Jerry Barnett, who has given awards as a porn producer and promoter to those that produce porns, which is the most racist and degrading pornography I've seen. Fresh off the boat from the Congo, for example, a parody of the John Warboys rapes in the back of his black cab. Guess who we shouted at when we were walking through the university campus? The orange fringes were out in force. There was shouting and screaming. They threw in a few of the phobias. I was biphobia. I was homophobic. I was Islamophobic. I was transphobic. I wasn't a real lesbian. That really hurt. I tried to talk to them about it. They were heckling all through my talk. He got a free pass. That was when I started using the word Orwellian. The worst point, I think, in their history of bullying us was when I was invited in 2017 to do a talk about growing up as a working class lesbian in the northeast of England for the Salford Working Class Library, the only venue of its kind in the country. And what they did to the people that had booked me and that were trying to arrange the talk was horrendous. They hounded and harassed the volunteers. They blocked their phone lines, targeted all of their sponsors and supporters, tried very hard to get their funding pulled. When they failed, they turned up and banged on the doors. Leftist poster boy, Owen Jones, was asked to denounce. He was asked to denounce him being, a faux working class, sorry. Who, in fact, the rather brilliant Lucy Massoud named Talcum X. He was asked to denounce the tactics and to give support to the library. Strangely enough, he declined. The library, because it's run by brave and principled people, did not for 1 second consider cancelling the event or replacing me with another speaker. I mean, they'd have had to have trolled Darlington for, but they could have got there. But they stood firm, and it was a great event. And this leads me to my main point. There were very few women, those very few women back then, that you could count on one hand, that were agitating about this. We knew it was coming. Now, some of you were not involved in feminism, too young, were in different circumstances. All of you are here, and that in and of itself, I'm afraid, is a brave position. Because if you've heard about what's happened to Nina Power, who was one of the 700 signatories saying trans women are women, we denounce the transphobic bigot feminists, very much in the Owen Jones, Laurie Penny type of camp, denounced us fully, all of a sudden is a fascist and a transphobe because she, quote, uncritically attended a woman's place event, right? So you're all here, and in a sense, this next bit might be for some that don't put their head above the parapet, but it's for all the people you know that won't, okay? During the time I was being publicly and visibly harassed and abused, aside from my friendship circle, which was absolutely brilliant, most people kept their heads down. I would get emails from feminist after feminist telling me they agreed with me, saying they shared my view on this. But of course they would end the email. We don't say anything, because they'd come after me, and I'd get the same treatment as you. Not very sisterly. So that really started to irk me. I would then get the Liberals telling me, and out lesbians since 1977, that they could not possibly support my position against transgender ideology because the trans rights movement, as they saw it, was the same as the gay liberation movement in the 70s. So they would be openly practicing discrimination. They refused to accept that this is a men's rights movement, which of course it is. They refused to see the pernicious misogyny and bullying. And they didn't quite get the fact that the men who said they were progressives had a perfect opportunity to vent their hatred towards us. They could scream transphobe and bigot in our faces and be seen as woke. But then let me get to the free speech warriors. The ones that would reassure me that they found my transphobia terrible, but they supported my right to say it. Oh, that offended me. Good people like Mary Beard, until she saw the light, said this to me, said it openly. Peter Tatchell said this on many an occasion. Caroline Lucas, Green Party MP, gave an interview to Penis News in which she said she was distressed and appalled by my transphobia. And then there were the women's organisations. Fawcett Society wrote a report on gender, meaning transgenderism, in which, in order to appear to be the good girls, said they denounced transphobes like me. And they didn't even cite something I had actually said. And let's be honest, there's plenty of scope. They took a line from a journalist from Penis News, what he had said about me, and used that as a citation and as a fucking footnote, if you don't mind. So I decided I would kick up a stink, and they took it out and grudgingly apologised. So when I hear women and men say to me now that they couldn't possibly risk going through what we've been through, I tell them that the reasons why the trans Taliban have got so powerful is because what happened to me, and there are other examples clearly, was a warning to other feminists and others, wasn't it? And it was a very effective warning. Who wanted to be in my position at that time? I certainly didn't. Having not identified as multiple personality, I had no choice. But since when were we ever a women's movement that decided we'd actually keep stum and let a few women take the shit? And here, I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about the 20-odd-year-old students or young women on housing estates who are bullied into adopting this position and desperately looking for feminism that will address the fact that they are being abused, raped, having their drinks spiked, having to endure pornography from their boyfriends, being groomed, being abused, being denigrated. We have a duty, a moral, ethical and political duty. Since when have we ever capitulated because we might be seen as nasty women? And yes, with this issue, it's true. There are women with much more to lose than some of us in this room, absolutely including myself. But you can't sack everybody. You can't. Everybody is a transphobe anyway. I mean, if Nina Power's a transphobe, some of the most reasonable people on earth that don't even say boo to a goose are now fascists. So we're all transphobes because this is an unreality that we are actually operating in. Yes, they could lose their jobs. And for some women that means no food for their kids. So we have to feed their kids. We have to have a whip round, like we did in the 70s and 80s, when refugees were run on the Dewsbury. We have to do what feminists are doing in countries where they have no rights. Pakistan, Saudi Arabia. Have you noticed that there are women's liberation movements? They're not just losing their jobs, they're losing their heads. They're being stoned in the fucking square. You don't get them saying, well, I'd best not say trans women and trans women, because it might upset. I've just come back from Uganda, where I was doing some reporting on lesbians. In Uganda, there is a 14-year sentence for same-sex encounters. Of course, it's much worse for women, because they have forced marriage, corrective rape, and they live under patriarchy, as well as the horrendous homophobic legislation. What do those women do? They don't go around saying, I'm too frightened. They have the most vibrant lesbian feminist movement I've ever encountered in the global south. These women are kick-ass, and they are not. If they lose their jobs, then they have to go to other women and say, feed me. We have to do this. We've too much at stake. We have to do it for those women that have no rights. We can't hide behind the comfort of a computer screen while waiting till women get just the worst abuse and that half the world is. Speak up. Stop doing that anonymous thing or the pseudonym thing. Stop saying, I can't say this. Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
Yeah.
When I was in Uganda, I was about to leave for the airport and I thought I'm going to have the conversation about transgender stuff on the way to the airport because they hadn't clocked that I had this history and this reputation. And I started speaking to one of the most fantastic lesbians I know in Kampala. And she told me, did you know that meeting we had yesterday where we had 50 lesbians there? I said, yeah. She said, do you know why I had to disappear for 10 minutes? No. Because 4 trans women came to the door and demanded to come in. And we were all telling our coming out stories and you were interviewing everyone. And I said to them, I know you hate me and I know you're going to kick up a fuss, but do one, go away. There are loads of transgender places for you to go. There are loads of LGBTQI places for you to go. This is women only. She said, I was raised with 9 brothers and I'm just not having it. So let's not have it.